Hello, it's Dr. Carin here. I hope you're doing well today. It is now Wednesday, June 17th, and we are very excited that we just opened the clinic yesterday for in-person appointments. So we do have a limited capacity, so do try to call early on to be able to get an appointment. Okay. And also, starting this month in June, we've changed our Facebook Live schedules a little bit. So on Monday and Wednesday at 1 p.m., that's when we're going to do our Facebook Lives. And then we will still do our master classes twice a month on Saturdays at noon, I believe. Now, please click the link in the video description to get a notification about our next Facebook Live. You'll also get summaries and videos straight to your inbox when you want to refer to them later. So the link is in the video description here. All right. So this month, our theme is stress. Now, we have been talking about stress for a while now, but we wanted to continue that conversation. So have you noticed that you're feeling stressed, overwhelmed, maybe restless or anxious, even when there's no obvious reason for it? Maybe there's worry, your mind is racing often, you find yourself rushing around even when you don't need to be. My patients are telling me that these difficult feelings make it really difficult to connect with other people, and they definitely don't feel grounded. We've been talking about stress since March for the last few months, but we really wanted to take a deep dive into it right now, and I think it's especially important with the current changes, with the businesses reopening, with schools opening a little bit, some people going back into work, schedule changes. There's optimism with this, but there are some fears about navigating this new daily life with more social interactions, with busier schedules. I think there's also a bit of this acceptance that we're not going to go back to normal life for a long time, that there's going to be this new normal to navigate and work around. So I'm definitely feeling that there's more stress right now, anxiety around work, play, and interacting with other people. So I wanted to share today 3 ways to help to reduce that feeling of stress and anxiety by working through the gut. So why gut health? What's the connection there between gut and stress? So we know that there's a strong link between the gut and the mind, because we know that when we smell really delicious smelling food, our stomach gurgles, our mouth waters. Basically, that's the digestive enzymes that are coming out. When we feel stressed, we can trigger butterflies in our stomach. And we also know that link between the IBS and anxiety and depression. It's thought that over half of patients with IBS have some anxiety, depression, or other mental health concerns. But what's really interesting is recent research is showing that this is not a one-way connection, that stress can not only trigger indigestion, but gut health can actually influence how we feel and even how we think. So how does that happen? How does the gut actually talk to the brain? This is called the gut-brain axis, or the gut-brain connection. So there's a couple different ways, and I'll review those. One is, and a really, really important one, is the vagus nerve. This is essentially a physical connection between the brain and the gut. So the vagus nerve is one of the cranial nerves, meaning it comes directly from the brain. But many of the cranial nerves just stay in the head and the neck. But the vagus nerve goes all the way from the brain along the side of the neck to the internal organs in the torso. So it goes to the liver, lungs, heart, pancreas, spleen, and the gut, and in multiple different areas of the gut. So what happens here is when the vagus nerve is activated, then all of those internal organ systems are activated, and that's when we get that rest and digest function. So not just digestion, but also detoxification, balancing of blood sugar, recovery and tissue repair, essentially a lot of these anti-inflammatory functions. So we often think about the brain as kind of being the boss. That's where the signals come from, and the boss tells the rest of the body what to do. But the interesting thing about the vagus nerve is that 80% of the information that's traveling along the vagus nerve is actually coming from the internal organs going to the brain, not the other way around. So essentially, these are like the brain is getting constant status updates about what's going on in the body. And the status update is going on all the time, continuously updating the brain about what's going on in the gut. If you've never heard of the vagus nerve before, I'll just give you a little bit more background about maybe what you can look out for to see what the status of your vagus nerve is like. So a few different signs of a dysfunction in the vagus nerve could be a fast resting heart rate, shallow breathing, blood sugar control issues. That could be sleep apnea, any issues with bowel transit time. So what that means is it could be constipation, or it could be the food just going through you really quickly. So either one of those can be issues of the vagus nerve. Low stomach acid, because remember the vagus nerve does activate your stomach to make stomach acid. So those are some things to look out for to tell you about how your vagus nerve is doing. Now, something like shallow breathing can certainly be a result of perceived stress, right? If you're feeling stress, you can definitely, that definitely can impact your breathing. But the shallow breathing can also sometimes inaccurately signal to the brain that we're actually in danger. And so the brain getting that information activates even more of your stress responses in order to support you. If in fact there was a lion chasing you, we want that extra adrenaline and that cortisol that's there. So essentially a small signal of danger or of stress can essentially communicate to the brain to activate even more of a stress response. So there's a little bit of a spiral that can happen because of that two-way direction in the vagus nerve. So because of this, things like practices like belly breathing can be so helpful, because a lot of times we don't even realize when we're breathing up in the top part of our lungs. I know that I grew up doing gymnastics and dance, so I was conditioned to keep tension in my belly for years. So when I started to do singing, it was really difficult, because in singing you have to have a relaxed belly so you can get that deep breath. And it was always a struggle for me to remind myself to relax my belly and make sure that air goes all the way down to the bottom parts of my lungs. If you're unsure whether you tend to breathe shallow or not, something that you can do really quickly is just put one hand on your chest, one hand right over your belly button, and just do a few deep breaths like that. And while you're doing those breaths, see if you can feel if one hand is moving more than the other. Oftentimes, it's the chest hand that's moving in and out more than the hand on the abdomen. And we really want the hand on the abdomen to be moving more, so that we're signaling a belly breath. Now, Dr. Niti just a couple of days ago also mentioned hot and cold showers, which I love. And this can be a really great way to essentially retrain your vagus nerve as well. If you missed that video, it's essentially hot and cold showers, just as you're having a regular warm shower. You turn at the end, just turn the heat up a little bit, and then turn it to very cold at the very end, building up to 30, 60 seconds or so. And that can actually help over time to retrain your vagus nerve so that your vagus nerve activity is stronger and more robust. When we do that, we're able to activate the rest and digest and detox and anti-inflammatory functions of the vagus nerve. And that in turn helps to communicate back to the brain about the status of the body as well. So I hope that makes sense. We could probably talk about the vagus nerve forever. We're just scratching the surface here, but I just wanted to let you know about what that connection and one of the most important connections are between the gut and the brain, and that's the vagus nerve. Let me know if you have any questions about the vagus nerve. The other connection between the gut and the brain is the bloodstream, and so this is more of a biochemical connection. Through the bloodstream, we can have hormones going between the gut and the brain. We can have neurotransmitters, which are chemical messengers, and we can have immune system going along, immune cells in the bloodstream communicating as well. Remember that immune system, about 70% resides in the gut, so a huge connecting point as well between the gut, the bloodstream, and the brain. Okay, so what is it that happens in the gut that can negatively affect the brain now that we know what the connection point is? So essentially, I'm going to mention just a couple things, but essentially what we're seeing is that you can get gut inflammation that turns into brain inflammation. You may have heard of leaky gut. The term leaky brain is also starting to be used often. So what happens is in a healthy gut, the single cell layer of your intestinal lining is held really close together so that only certain particles like nutrients are allowed and absorbed through into the bloodstream. But with chronic gut inflammation, and that can come from stress or excess processed foods or excess yeast, bacterial overgrowth. With those issues leading to leaky gut, you can have the glue between the cells actually loosen up and allow unwanted particles, like partially digested food, to leak into the bloodstream. And one of these unwanted particles, this is called LPS, or lipopolysaccharides. It's actually a component of bacteria in our gut. This can actually leak through our intestinal tract, go into our bloodstream, and then actually affect our brain. In fact, we know that part of what it does is it goes to the amygdala. The amygdala is a part of the brain where it's activated when we're in fear or when we're anxious. And when it activates that amygdala, we feel not only more anxiety, but difficulty with thinking, even more pain. So the LPS can cause or have an influence on the amygdala and that mood, but it also can actually damage the blood-brain barrier, leading to even more brain inflammation. So the blood-brain barrier normally protects the brain against things like environmental toxins that are in the bloodstream. So not only does the LPS create that damage and cause brain inflammation, but it can also lead to the brain being even more susceptible to inflammation. So this is of course an issue because we know that brain inflammation is a major factor in mood issues like depression. And unfortunately, this can compound even more brain inflammation. And we talked about how the vagus nerve is very anti-inflammatory, but of course, if that inflammation level gets too high, it gets really difficult for the vagus nerve to be able to put the brakes on that inflammation. So this is where healing the gut inflammation, and particularly healing the gut lining, is so important for brain health. So I hope that makes sense, that that's how there's the leaky gut issue that can turn into a leaky brain issue and change the stress, feeling of stress and anxiety. A second issue that can happen in the gut that can affect the brain is issues with gut flora imbalance. So we're talking about the bacterial or the microbial balance in the gut. So I'm sure you've heard about that good and bad bacteria being really important, or good and bad bacteria balance being important for our digestion or for making certain vitamins in the gut. But we also know that there are certain beneficial bacteria, good bacteria, I believe it was a lactobacillus strain, that can actually change our amygdala again in a good way, so that we actually feel less stress, less fear, and less anxiety. So what our gut flora is doing, our gut bacteria balance is doing, can affect right to that fear center of the brain. Another issue that another component of the gut flora to brain function is the gut flora helps us to make chemical messengers, neurotransmitters. These are things like serotonin and GABA. And these are messengers that we know affects our mood. In fact, a lot of people call them brain chemicals, even though more of those chemicals are made in the gut than in the brain. But they do have quite an effect, even when it's coming from the gut, to how we feel in terms of, if it's serotonin, how happy we feel, or if it's GABA, if we feel relaxed and calm and grounded. So there's a couple different ways there where the bacterial balance can be really critical to our mood. So that's both the diversity of the microbiome in the gut, as well as do we have a robust number of those beneficial organisms in the gut. So knowing this makes sense that if you have dysbiosis, which is the imbalance of that gut flora, or even using some antibiotics can actually negatively affect our mood. Have you ever experienced that with taking an antibiotic actually affecting your mood? That is possible as well. And we had mentioned before that connection between the patients that have IBS and anxiety and depression. We know that in IBS, we know now that many of those patients have bacterial overgrowth in their gut, and it could be that there's a lot of that influence on the brain. So looking at bacterial balance can be a really, really important part of supporting better mood and stress resilience. So I know there's a lot, but we've just scratched the surface of the gut-brain axis, but hopefully we can talk about that more in another time. But I wanted to give you just a few take-home tips from this, how you can reduce stress and how you can reduce anxiety by optimizing your gut. So first and foremost, really the most important thing that you can do is creating an environment for a robust vagus nerve function. So we talked about belly breathing. I will add a link to Dr. Vanessa's video on some specific exercises you could do for that. Also, we talked about hot and cold showers. I'll provide a link to that as well, so you can learn how to actually do that. And so that can also be setting up an environment around meal times that are less stressful, less busy, whether that's making your meals simpler or doing some meal planning on the weekends to simplify your weekday meals, whether that's just putting relaxing music on while you're eating dinner. Maybe you want to do 3 belly breaths with the whole family just before eating. And you can do a lot of different things here, but really set up that environment to create less stress around, especially around meal times. This, of course, will help not only feel good in the moment, but will also help to strengthen the vagus nerve function and therefore stomach acid production. And that will help to prevent bad bugs from coming into the system, right? When we're talking about good bacteria balance. So that leads me to my next tip, all about bacteria balance. So you know, I'm sure about probiotics that you can get from supplements and foods, but also just making sure that we're not getting too much pesticides in our body. So I'm sure you've heard that taking antibiotics can be hard on the bacteria balance because it can kill both good and bad bacteria. But pesticides can work in a similar way. We know, for example, glyphosate can affect the good bacteria and allow many of the bad bacteria to survive. So this is why when we talk about eating organic, this will be really helpful for your gut flora. If you're wanting to look for, which foods should I buy organic, I would just recommend going to the ewg.org. They just came out with the 2020 update of the Dirty Dozen. So those are the foods that you want to buy organic. I believe it's strawberries, spinach, and kale kind of at the top of the list there, but there's a whole list there if you're wanting to know what you should prioritize organic. Also, for bacterial balance, I'd highly recommend making sure that you're also eating foods that are antimicrobial. So, meaning these are foods that can actually naturally control overgrowth of fungus or yeast or bad bacteria. So these are things like ginger, garlic, thyme, and even there's a component in coconut oil called caprylic acid that can be really helpful for against fungus particularly. So adding in some coconut oil in there as well. And of course, sometimes stronger antimicrobials are needed. So talk to your practitioner if that's something that might be of concern to you. We do use herbal antimicrobials, for example, when there's a greater gut flora imbalance. And lastly, magnesium. If there's a favorite mineral out there, for me, it would be magnesium. So unfortunately, due to stress, modern diets, agricultural practices, magnesium deficiency is quite common. So it's almost like a vitamin D deficiency. It's quite prevalent, and some estimates are somewhere around 80% of the North American population being deficient in magnesium. So that's a huge number of people. Now, magnesium is critical to hundreds of different reactions in the body. It's important for heart health, for blood sugar, for stress response, but it's really important for making those neurotransmitters like serotonin that we mentioned before, that can be really important for mood health. So taking magnesium can actually help to feel less stress and anxiety. That's why it's a very popular nutrient to take for improving sleep, for example. Another point I want to make is calcium over the recent years has been very popular to take as a supplement. It's very common that I find that people have self-prescribed calcium. Now, in the body, minerals often work in pairs. So you've maybe heard of sodium being balanced with potassium, for example, and making sure that electrical impulses work properly in the body. So it's not just how much sodium, but is it balanced with the amount of potassium? Calcium works with magnesium in the same way. We have to have a good balance of both. In fact, magnesium helps to absorb calcium through our gut and into our body. So, for example, if you're taking calcium for your bone health, then doing magnesium will have a synergistic effect. And also it is helpful for your bone health as well as helping with the calcium absorption. So if you're taking a calcium supplement, first of all, I would talk to your practitioner and see if that's appropriate for your case, but also seeing if you need to balance that with magnesium. And there are a few different kinds of magnesium supplements out there. I'll mention a little bit more about that in a second. But magnesium-rich foods are pretty common as well. So just trying to get some of these, those leafy vegetables like chard and spinach has a good amount of calcium. But even things like ghee and nuts and seeds, sprouts, fish, sea vegetables, and avocado have a lot of magnesium. Also dark chocolate and cacao as well. Speaking of the magnesium supplements, there are multiple different kinds. The kinds that I would recommend are more of the highly absorbable ones, so magnesium citrate, malate, magnesium glycinate. For stress and anxiety, I tend to use magnesium glycinate the most, because that one can be particularly calming. So, of course, always check with your practitioner about adding any supplements, but that can be a nice, easy, inexpensive addition to your magnesium in your diet. Magnesium can also be applied actually topically, so you can get oils or sprays that you can put on your skin as well. And a lot of people already do the Epsom salt bath, which is magnesium dissolved into the bath. As long as you're sitting in there for at least 20 minutes, you'll get that magnesium absorbed through your skin. So that's a nice, easy, and relaxing way of getting magnesium in there. So I hope that makes sense. If you have any questions that come up, please drop them in the comments here. I will get to them, if not right away, shortly after. So remember, the first step really is to make sure that we're creating a pleasant eating environment, and then add in more of those vagus nerve practices as you go. Join in on Dr. Neetu's hot and cold shower challenge. That means doing a hot and cold shower every day this week. And let us know how that feels. I think it's amazing to do that. I love how I feel after I have the hot and cold shower. I wanted to bring this topic up today because I think, just like with shallow breathing, we often are not aware of things that are going on in our gut until symptoms show up. But those symptoms don't always show up in the gut. Sometimes they can actually show up as stress and anxiety issues. So definitely want to bring this up and just give you some information about how you can start working on gut balance, gut inflammation, and healing the gut. If gut health is ignored, unfortunately, because of that two-way communication between the gut and the brain, when there's stress and mood, that can lead to worse indigestion, but also that can lead to even greater feeling of stress and anxiety. And then even further down the road, it can lead to insomnia, fatigue, and even weak immune system. So definitely, if you can work on a healthy gut, healthy vagus nerve, that will be helpful for a healthy brain. And I hope that you can feel calmer and more grounded with doing that as well. So let me ask you, what will you do for your gut and brain health today? Would it be a hot and cold shower? Maybe a pleasant environment around the dinner table? Let us know. I'd love to know. Drop a comment now so we can see that. All right, that's it for the tips on gut health. I do want to let you know that our next live is a masterclass this Saturday. That's with Dr. Neetu. I believe that is going to be at noon, and it's on homeopathy and the laws of healing in homeopathy. So you don't want to miss that. That's going to be great. Make sure that you click on the link to subscribe for your newsletter so you can get notified when the next Facebook Live is going to be and get the summary for that. And then last reminder, you only have 4 days left to get your Brio Bingo card done. You don't have to fill out the entire card, just one line. And then when you do, give us a call or email us at Brio to be entered to win prizes for that. All right, that's it for me today. Thanks for joining me. Let me know if you have any questions or comments about this. Drop them in the comments now, and feel free to share this information if you think it'll be helpful to your friends or your family. Thanks again for joining me. Have a fantastic day. See you then. Bye.